Researchers who take Bigfoot seriously don't take every alleged Bigfoot video seriously. In fact, they're often the first to call foul on the fakers. So when they tell us they've seen video they think is legit, we take a look too.
The forests don't just breathe, they murmur, they watch, and sometimes they reveal things we aren't ready to see. August 20th, 1992 would be one of those rare, shattering moments. The Blue Mountains of Oregon stretched in dense, impenetrable waves of green, a place where civilization had only lightly pressed its fingerprints. Here, in a remote clearing near Deduck Spring, an experienced man named Paul Freeman stepped carefully through the undergrowth, unknowingly moving toward a moment that would ripple through the world of Bigfoot research for decades. Paul Freeman wasn't some starry-eyed dreamer. A former U.S. Forest Service patrolman, Freeman had spent weeks returning to this isolated spot after discovering peculiar signs, unusually large, human-like footprints pressed deep into the soft earth. It was not just one track or two, it was an entire scatter of them, weaving their way through the forest like silent echoes of something enormous. Standing among the moss and fallen branches, Paul observed the ground intently. "It looks like they've been here," he muttered, crouching low. His voice was steady, but the air around him crackled with something unseen, something just beyond the veil of certainty.
Oh, there he goes.
The tracks were fresh. Whatever had made them, it was still close. The tension in the air thickened. As Paul pressed deeper into the woods, the stillness was shattered. A sudden rustle, a sharp crack of brush snapping under heavy weight. Freeman froze. His senses sharpened into a razor's edge. Then, through the branches, a figure, massive, upright, moving with a lumbering, purposeful gait that no human could mimic. The camera, clutched in Paul's trembling hands, captured what would become one of the most debated pieces of evidence in cryptozoological history. There it was, the creature, slipping between the trees, heavy strides parting the undergrowth, arms swinging low and deliberately with each powerful step. Big strides, researchers would later say, analyzing the footage frame by frame, the way the arms swung, the way the hair lay naturally across the shoulders. It wasn't the awkward movements of a man in a suit. It was something else, something real. Paul's instincts screamed at him to run, but training and raw determination kept him rooted. He had found the tracks. Now, he had seen the maker. Hours later, another chapter unfolded, not in the wilds, but in the quiet basement of the Freeman home. Mike Freeman, Paul's teenage son, was there, lost in the mundanities of an ordinary day. When his father burst through the door, Mike heard the heavy footfalls before he saw him. Climbing the stairs two at a time, Mike reached the landing just as Paul stumbled into view, a disheveled mess of sweat, dirt, and a ghostly pale face. His hands shook violently, clinging to the precious footage like it was a holy relic.
I kind of ran up the stairs, and here's my dad standing there, and he's covered in sweat and dirt, and he's pale in color, and he's shaking. I always tell people that that's the only time in my entire life that I ever saw my dad scared of anything.
"I always tell people," Mike would later say, his voice tinged with awe, "that's the only time in my entire life I ever saw my dad scared of anything." Paul Freeman, a man who had faced wild animals, forest fires, and the unpredictable dangers of the wilderness, was rattled to his core. Whatever he had seen, whatever he had captured on film, had cracked something deep inside him. The circle of trust. Word of the encounter traveled fast among those who lived and breathed Bigfoot research. One of the first to step forward was Cliff Barackman, a respected field researcher and a close friend of the Freeman family. For Cliff, Paul's encounter wasn't just an isolated story. It fit into a larger tapestry that Paul had been weaving for over a decade. Paul wasn't just filming chance encounters. He was mapping them. Every report, every set of tracks, every whispered sighting was carefully recorded on a sprawling map pinned up in his basement. Dates, coordinates, environmental conditions, all carefully logged with a precision that would rival professional scientific studies. This wasn't the wild theorizing of a man chasing myths. It was a methodical, data-driven hunt for the truth, one that had quietly attracted the attention of anthropologists, biologists, and PhDs across the country. More scientists had pored over Paul's collected evidence than over any other Bigfoot dataset in history. For Barackman, one glance at the 1992 footage was enough to draw a compelling parallel. It mirrored the legendary Patterson-Gimlin film of 1967, that iconic sequence of a massive, ape-like figure striding through Bluff Creek, California. The similarities were haunting. The creature in Paul's video moved with the same heavy, deliberate grace. The head sat low on powerful shoulders. The arms were disproportionately long, swinging in a slow, pendulous rhythm. The massiveness, the musculature, the overall presence, it all pointed to something beyond ordinary. "I think it's Bigfoot," Cliff said simply, and in that simple statement hung the weight of 1,000 cautious hopes. Science meets mystery. To separate fact from fantasy, the footage was placed under a new kind of scrutiny. Wildlife biologist Floyd Hayes, accustomed to cataloging the natural world with skeptical eyes, was among the first to weigh in. Could it be a black bear, misidentified in the chaos of the moment? Hayes shook his head. Bears can rise up on their hind legs, true, but never for long, and never with the fluid, balanced stride seen in Freeman's footage. Bears had elongated snouts. This creature's face was flat. "I cannot rule this out as being the Bigfoot," Hayes concluded, a verdict that carried more impact for its careful, scientific phrasing. Then came Dr. Jeff Meldrum, a name synonymous with serious Bigfoot research. An anatomist and anthropologist by training, Meldrum had long studied Freeman's casts, massive, deep impressions that bore hallmarks of weight, movement, and anatomy unknown in hoaxes. Watching the footage, Meldrum leaned in. The creature's massiveness was undeniable. The thick trapezius muscles rising up along its neck, the small head perched atop a mountain of muscle. These weren't traits easily faked. The slow, powerful swing of its long arms sealed it. "You can't help but be struck," he said, "by how much this resembles the Patterson-Gimlin figure." The Blue Mountains held their breath once more, and the world, for a moment, leaned in closer. The marks of authenticity. The creature moved through the trees like a ghost made of muscle and shadow, and in the harsh clarity of daylight, something remarkable was revealed. The sunlight scattered naturally across its body, dancing across thick strands of hair in a way no cheap costume could fake. Unlike the synthetic shimmer of faux fur, this coat absorbed the light, showing subtle textures, a living, breathing creature cloaked in nature's own fabric. Dr. Jeff Meldrum leaned forward as he studied the footage, his keen anatomist's eye catching details that others would miss. "If this was a hoax," he noted thoughtfully, "it would require very skilled knowledge of animal anatomy. And not just anatomy, geography too." The location itself whispered credibility. Deduck Springs sat in a cradle of prime habitat, thick forests, fresh water, and endless tracts of unbroken wilderness. Southeastern Washington, where Freeman's encounter unfolded, possessed an almost perfect forensic laboratory. Loess soil, a superfine glacial sediment, like nature's own fingerprint pad. Tracks found here preserved ridges, lines, even the faintest whorls, the kind of micro-details only real, weighty creatures could leave behind. It was in this very soil that something astonishing was found. The first recorded skin ridge detail, primate-like dermal patterns pressed into the earth by massive, unseen feet. Proof that whatever walked these woods was built like no human. For scientists like Meldrum, the implications were serious. The evidence emerging from the Blue Mountains had undergone more rigorous peer scrutiny than any other collection in Bigfoot history. And now, Freeman's footage added a visceral visual heart to that growing body of proof. Their final judgment? Possible Bigfoot. Not fantasy, not a joke, possible reality. But Freeman's tape hinted at something even deeper, something more chilling. Eyewitnesses suggested there wasn't just one creature that day. There were two, one caught on camera, one hidden, just beyond the lens, lost in the folds of the forest. Where one walks, others may follow. And so, with the winds of mystery stirring once again through the trees, the search continued. Heat signatures in the dark. Fast forward 2 decades, across the country to the muggy, dense woods of Torreya State Park, Florida. It was May 2012, and 2 men, Stacy Brown Sr. and his son, Stacy Brown Jr., camped under a canopy of stars, chasing a legend that had haunted the American South for centuries. Unlike Freeman, the Browns came prepared for more than footprints. They carried a weapon that could see what the eyes could not, a FLIR thermal camera. The humid night pulsed with strange noises, cracks, shuffles, heavy footfalls weaving left and right, sometimes close, sometimes far. Predators, curious deer, or something far more deliberate. Suddenly, a flash of movement. Through the shimmering heat vision haze, a small, dark figure peeked from behind a thick tree. Then, it moved. In a single, fluid motion, the figure crossed a narrow clearing. Fast, purposeful, impossibly agile. Panic gripped Stacy Sr. In a voice edged with terror, he barked, "We gotta go! We gotta go! Do you got your gun?" The camera jolted and cut out. The Browns, both seasoned woodsmen, sprinted back to their truck, hearts hammering against their ribs. There, huddled in the dim glow of dashboard lights, They reviewed the footage, and there it was, a figure, mid-stride, caught in a perfect side glance, eerily reminiscent of the famous Patty pose from the 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film. The unmistakable profile, the long arms, the muscular build, and the chilling, deliberate awareness that it was being watched. For Stacy Jr., the conclusion was instant and absolute. "I knew exactly what we had," he said. "Proof, for me and my dad. Because who, after all, would be a mile and a half deep into Florida swampland on a random Tuesday night, running through the trees in the dark, without even a flashlight?" The skunk-ape connection. Florida's dense forests and swampy heartlands had always whispered of something lurking beyond human reach. The Seminoles and Muskogee tribes once spoke of Estikapkaki, the tall man, a guardian of the forests. Their oral histories reached back generations, describing a towering, powerful figure that lived in the shadows, protecting the land from those who would defile it. Modern sightings called it something cruder, but no less haunting. The skunk ape, a smaller, swamp-adapted cousin to the towering Bigfoots of the Pacific Northwest. Shorter, leaner perhaps, but no less mysterious, and carrying with it a smell, a musky, rotting odor that clung to the humid air like a warning. Noted investigator Steve Culls wasn't surprised that the Browns had found something here. Florida's wilderness had long been a cradle of sightings, with reports stacking up year after year. Different names, different shapes perhaps, but always the same undeniable truth. Something walks these woods. But could it have been a human, a prankster, lost hunter, or careless hiker? The Browns' footage, however, told a different story. Captured through thermal imaging, the figure gave off a clear, strong heat signature. No bulky clothing, no insulation, nothing to mute the infrared glow. A person running naked through the underbrush? In the middle of nowhere? In the middle of the night? Even the skeptics had to admit, the heat pattern was that of a living body, but not behaving like any human would. As experts leaned in to study the footage, the swamp around Torreya State Park seemed to fall even more silent, watching, waiting. For now, the creature slipped away again, back into legend. But the Browns had caught something real, something that left behind more than just footprints. It left a mark on everyone who dared to look closely. Creatures without chains. The figure in the Browns' footage continued to puzzle those who studied it. No articles of clothing muted its heat signature. No insulation concealed the living warmth of its body. It appeared, by every scientific measure, completely natural. Wildlife biologist Stephanie Schuttler leaned in closer, scanning the footage, the way the creature moved, the way it carried its weight. It wasn't human. It was closer, she mused, to a large primate, but not quite like any primate she had ever studied. Chimpanzees and gorillas could walk upright for brief moments. But this creature, this looming presence, bore no resemblance to their familiar gaits. Its legs seemed too long, its posture unnervingly hunched, yet balanced in a way that suggested strength rather than deformity. In Florida, speculation bloomed like vines in the swamp. Could a gorilla or large chimpanzee have escaped from one of the many private zoos that dotted the state? The idea wasn't without precedent. Exotic animals had slipped into Florida's wilderness before, sometimes never to be seen again. But anthropologist Kathy Strain had her doubts. The way the creature emerged from the trees, moving with what she called a Groucho walk, that low, bent-knee shuffle, wasn't characteristic of gorillas or chimps. It was, however, eerily consistent with what Bigfoot witnesses across decades had described. Thick arms, short muscular legs, a massive torso perched atop a headless, hulking frame. Not spindly or fragile, but dense, substantial, a walking wall of muscle. And its size, estimated at 6.5 to 7 feet tall, placed it far beyond the dimensions of even the largest primates. Whatever it wasn't some escaped zoo specimen. Echoes in the wilderness. Skepticism hung heavy over the Browns' thermal footage. If a massive creature was truly moving through the woods, why wasn't there more heat signature bleeding through the trees? The figure simply disappeared from view, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence and a flood of questions. Some suggested a hoax, a prankster daring enough to run naked through the unpredictable Florida night. But Stacy Brown Jr. offered a simple explanation. The thermal camera had died at the worst possible moment. Early generation battery-draining models were notoriously unreliable. Dr. Jeff Meldrum, a leading expert and a man who knew Stacy personally, vouched for his sincerity. Would anyone really risk their life, bare and defenseless, amid venomous snakes, prowling alligators, and a pitch-black swamp just to fool a camera? Highly unlikely. Thus, the Browns' experience earned an unsettling label: unknown creature. Not proven, not debunked, real enough to demand further investigation. Something had been there, moving, watching, and it wasn't anything we had a name for. Meanwhile, far to the north, A different kind of encounter stirred in the frozen heart of Alaska. Keith Lindsay, metal detector in hand, combed the empty wilderness outside Fairbanks when the first sound shattered the evening calm. A howl, deep and mournful, that seemed to seep up from the ground itself. Not a wolf's high melodic cry, something heavier, older. As Keith packed up to flee, the forest pressed closer. Grunts, whoops, and then a violent splash beside him, as a rock, thrown, not fallen, landed in the nearby river. Later analysis confirmed, the howls captured on Keith's recording most closely resembled a wolf. Yet wolves don't throw rocks. And in the Alaskan Triangle, a region infamous for unexplained disappearances, the wild often hides more than just predators. What had stalked Keith that night remained a mystery. One more shadow stretching across a land where facts blur into fear. Keith Lindsay's encounter wasn't random. It took place deep within the Alaskan Triangle, a notorious stretch of wilderness between Juneau, Anchorage, and Utqiagvik, where planes vanish and people disappear without a trace. Field researcher Cliff Barackman noted that unlike other great apes, Sasquatches are rumored predators, known for hunting deer, elk, and perhaps when desperate, even humans. Keith's captured howls didn't sound like ordinary animal calls. They sounded like warnings, echoes from a land where ancient predators might still roam. Native legends from the Olympic Peninsula spoke of Bigfoot not as a gentle creature, but a feared kidnapper, with stories of children stolen from canoes and tragic endings. Modern science remained cautious. Dr. Stephanie Schuttler pointed to the unlikelihood of a primate surviving Alaska's brutal winters, and the absence of physical evidence like nests or remains further muddied the waters. And yet, Keith had captured something not easily explained by wolves, wolverines, or any known creature. In Alaska's endless frozen forests, some truths may remain buried forever, waiting just beyond reach for those brave enough to seek them. The Wood Booger's Shadow. In 2009, thousands of miles away from the Alaskan cold, Chuck Newton and his son blazed a trail through the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia on their ATV, unaware that they were about to join a tradition older than America itself. With the sun low and the shadows long, they witnessed it, a towering, hairy figure, crossing their path with casual indifference. The camera caught it in fleeting clarity, a massive, upright being, perhaps 7 feet tall, its body a dark silhouette against the wild green. Field researcher Cliff Barackman connected the encounter to ancient Cherokee legends of giant, hair-covered beings, not unlike the Bigfoot of the Pacific Northwest. Long before modern stories, Appalachia had its own name for the beast, the wood booger. Parents warned children, "Stay close or the booger will get you." It wasn't just folklore. It was survival knowledge, born from generations living at the edge of the unknown. Skeptics hesitated. Some proposed it was a human in a costume, but the stride was too long, the mask too real, the reaction too raw to fit the mold of a hoax. Dr. Jeff Meldrum, analyzing the footage, saw something that science couldn't easily explain. Without hard measurements, certainty was elusive. But if the creature's size and proportions were true, it wasn't a prankster, it wasn't a bear, it wasn't a man, it was something else, something old, something still breathing beneath the whispering pines and forgotten trails of the Appalachian wilderness. Across the blue mountains of Oregon, the swamps of Florida, the frozen reaches of Alaska, and the misty folds of Appalachia, the same question echoes. What walks in the places we've forgotten? Footprints pressed into lowest soil. Thermal images capturing forms we cannot explain. Howls that pierce the night, carrying a sadness and rage too deep for ordinary beasts. Stories of the tall man, the skunk ape, the wood booger, different names for the same enduring fear. Science tries to draw hard lines between fact and fantasy, but in the forgotten corners of America, where the forests grow thick and the stars watch in silence, those lines blur. Maybe not every sighting is real, maybe not every noise is a Bigfoot, but every once in a while, when the air is thick with the scent of moss and rain, when the last light fades from the sky, the world reminds us that we are not alone. Something ancient moves through the trees, something to watch, waiting, leaving just enough behind to make us wonder, and just little enough to keep us hunting. The final truth? Some legends don't die. They walk beside us just out of sight.